Hi, I'm Brian. This is the last in the main series about code generators. I've been going on. I had a whole list here. We started with the brief history. We've gone through a couple of different variations of like, what does this look like? Inputs, get generated context, do some rendering stuff, get some outputs, right? So we've gone through a lot of different details. The last thing we want to talk about, because I really like data engineering, I'm really in the data space, is applicability of code generators in the SQL space to a bunch of very specific SQL outputs, right? So like we could drain Java outputs or Python outputs, what you're going to do with those and APIs and whatever. But I really want to focus on SQL because I think there's some different things about generating code for SQL and persistent data structures than other things. And really, the bullet down here is change application. So rolling out a new version of a Python library oftentimes has a very different implication that is rolling out new database structures. And we go to a lot of work. There's some really neat tools in the space to figure out how to reliably, roll forward and roll back changes in databases. We spend huge amounts of time. There's lots of neat advances now in metadata that's in files in your data lake, and schema evolution in the file is a big thing. I think it just kicks the can down the curve just for what it's worth. But this change application of changing structures for persistent data is hard. It's so hard that some of these tools are like designed to do it better and designed to really address that, sometimes maybe at the expense of other functionality, right? So in this category, we will talk about like ETL and ELT tools kind of in general, and not, picking on anyone that has a connector framework or anything like that, but really ETL and ELT tools for many, many years have been doing lots of SQL generation to generate commands based on data models to run against data warehouses and data stores, right? Like this is a very old thing. There's lots of flavors of this sort of automatic generation. There's a whole bunch of things that I would talk to as like incremental loader generators. So the ability to look at data models, particularly like the main property in this space is in the dimensional modeling space. There's huge amounts of people out there that have like really good incremental loading algorithms and models to take a given data model. You're mapping facts and dimensions from source tables. It works pretty nicely, right? Enter DBT in that mix, which, is a code generator, but it's not bound to this. And it's better than this because it gives you more flexible templates. It does do shareable input models. It does do referenceable shareable templates, right? So it checks a couple of big boxes in terms of reuse and extensibility. The biggest pro is also like the biggest con, in my opinion. And that is this. The biggest magic with DBT is that in this context, added to the data model is access to a real relational database, right? So there's an argument, we talked about code generation that runs a lot of it static, and then we're going to go commit it, and then we're going to run it somewhere. But a lot of data warehousing code in these ETL, ELT incremental loaders, like common patterns in there include when the loader runs, go look in the database for some metadata about the last run and the last records for this table and the last time this was successful, and use that metadata to code generate a bunch of SQL so that we can incrementally load new stuff, right? And there's a bunch of variations where you're kind of doing that and building those incremental scripts, and you can do it, essentially all not against a production database, but there's a bunch of interesting design patterns that do emerge if you make the allowance that right here in the context, you can connect to a database. I argue the pro of this is the con, right? Because what it often means is that these templates, and when you're doing these rebuild jobs, you're rebuilding lots of structures. I won't go down like a whole, like what pro and con of that, but the ability to actively use the database in the context, right? Like that subtle switch, everything else about it looks like a lot of code generators, but that subtle switch and the fact that you're running against target, sort of at all times, you're going to go run against one of these things and be able to use its data to build the next code. It is a very different capability. We've got a bunch of UI graphical tools. Again, ETL, ELT, we've had like various forms of user interfaces to draw pictures and generate a bunch of code for a long time. Similarly, in this dimensional modeling space, we've had lots of tools that let you build pretty data models and then generate out all variations of star schema, and they'll use all kinds of different notations. Like there's a ton of stuff here. Newer, right? Data Vault, Anchor, kind of Anchor does this really interesting thing, right? So we talked a lot about structural generation. And if you're generating structural generation for OLTP, maybe you're, I'm sorry, yeah, OLTP, maybe you're just generating third normal form tables, right? Maybe some fourth normal form, right? You go over here, and by the way, those structures are often hard to change. So there's some cool tools to let you do roll up and roll down as you go through environments to like practice this, but like third normal form is not inherently easy to apply changes to in all cases if you have a reasonable object model mapped onto it, which is not a bad thing to do with the database. So you go over into the dimensional modeling space. There's lots of tools that like can let you connect one set of queries and things, and then add all of the metadata about, oh, well, this is a dimension. This is slowly changing. It's slowly changing on this column. Like there's a bunch of terminology and stuff that goes along with this. And there's a bunch of good user interface tools for that. Similarly, I think we're seeing some emergence here, like Data Vault and Anchor, similar in that they do a better job, I think, of generating structural objects that are designed to allow changing data structures over a longer span of time without the more destructive stuff that people are used to, right? So these are like really theoretical models, but the nice thing, if you understand the input model that's required, like the minimum input model that's required, you can run through some templates and then end up with like some SQL that you can run to go build initial structures and then go build change sets. And that's the cool one, right? Now you're building change sets and you're saying, hey, go apply this new thing. And I've got this ever evolving ecosystem, both in all my code and, you know, way out into my data warehouse, ultimately built on the same kind of set of tools and set of constructs and data models. So that is the quick overview on code generators. Thank you.